welcome to tonight's session with Rich Perrotta from Marvel and DC. He's peeping out from behind my elbow. There he is. He's going to be talking about life as an artist for the comic industry and giving the students an insight into his own career and also into the actual life as a freelance comic artist, which can be really interesting. I hope you enjoy today's session. As ever, there are plenty of other events going on over the rest of the week. We've got the Games Expo tomorrow, and then we've got some really good stuff on Friday as well. So check out the website to book on to any other Industry Week events that you need to hit. We'd love you to share your week with the rest of Confetti. So if there's an opportunity to take some photographs today, make sure that you tag them with the hashtag IW22 hashtag and post them on Instagram and whatever your social media thing of choice is. There are so many nowadays, I get very confused. So you're in with a chance of winning an Amazon voucher for the best photograph of Industry Week, which could be of Rich doing something really exciting. That could be the winning picture, you never know. It's possible. If you are a graduate, which I don't think anyone is in this session, so I'm going to skip this bit because nobody is a graduate in this session because you're all FE students, aren't you? If there is an emergency of some description, a fire type thing or anything like that, or an alarm goes off, we need to head straight down the stairs and follow the emergency exit signs. And I'm going to hand over to Rich now because we've delayed this for far too long as it is. So, okay, brilliant. Over to Rich. Thank you very much.
Hey, yes. Hi. Okay, do I have to look in the camera the whole time or I can address everybody? Okay, good. That's a good thing. Hi. Hi. Hello. How are you? Hi. I'm so glad you're all here. My name is Rich Perrotta. I am a professional comic book artist and have been so since 1994. And I started my career at Marvel Comics. That was my first professional art job. So you could tell after this point, it's all downhill from there because then I had to work for the other companies and stuff. But I was what you would designate as an inker on a lot of the comics over at Marvel. Forgive me for stuttering a little bit. I'm a little bit nervous. I've worked on just about every single title that you can think of at one point or another, from Iron Man to Deadpool to X-Men to New Mutants to Marvel Team Up to Spider-Man, Captain Marvel, Thunderbolts, whatever. Every single book you could possibly think of. And I did that for about a good 10 years until 2005, when after a while as a freelancer, when you're a freelancer, you hook up with editors. And the editors are the ones who give you the jobs. So a lot of the editors, they went to greener pastures. So after a while, there were no more editors. So I was like, okay, gotta go. I left, and 5 years later, I decided I wanted to try it again. So I decided to go for DC Comics, and I wound up working for them for 2 years on the book Booster Gold and the limited series The Ray and a couple of issues of Batman. And in 2013, I walked away from inking and from Marvel and DC altogether, and I decided to go into the independent circuit, where I had a lot of great success with a whole bunch of comics that range from time travel to wrestling to all sorts of other weird metal or heavy metal genres or whatever, which I think is great because I love the untapped potential from independent books. And in 2021, I decided to go into self-publishing. I wrote, drew, inked, colored, and lettered my own graphic novel series called The Incantessi. And I've already finished the first 2 chapters, and I'm in the middle of working on chapter 3. Now, a career like this is not a smooth ride. I will say that for nothing. I'm just gonna say it out loud. It's not easy to do this. If you love it, it's worth it. But it's not an easy ride to do. I mean, especially if you wanted to get into Marvel or DC, because you have to go through submission editors and you have to go through hundreds of people who are trying to do the same thing as you are. Especially now with the advent of social media, because with everyone trying to show everything off on Facebook or Instagram or anything, all these people who think that they can do it or who can do it are going to be jockeying for the same position that you are. And instead of like maybe 30 or 40 people that I've had to jump over, we're talking maybe 3,000 or 4,000 people that you have to jump over because everyone thinks that they can do it. And they all drive it in and they all try and get their submissions in. You know, there's so many things behind putting together a comic book. You know, I mean, you have to be a master of all sorts of disciplines. I mean, one of them you have to, there's so many things you have to do, you know. And I mean, for me, creating my own book, I've had to learn a lot of different disciplines. Like one of them was screenwriting and how to arrange a story in a 22-page or 48-page format, whichever you want to do. And then obviously there's the drawing that I had to learn with perspective, excuse me, with perspective and figure drawing and storytelling and all that other lovely jazz. And then there's the inking, which I already knew. But then there's also the coloring, which you have to learn, you know, depending on like the time of day and all that other stuff. You know, how bright a scene has to be, how dark a scene has to be, you know, staging, all that stuff. You know, you see, being a comic book artist is a really, really wonderful thing, but it's also something that takes a lot of your time. It takes a lot of your time socially. It takes a lot of your time with family, friends, and all that stuff. You know, it's a very strict discipline, but when you get everything done and people like what you do, it's completely worth it. You know, so I'd like to take some questions. I mean, I had a PowerPoint presentation, but unfortunately it's not working. So if anybody has any questions, I'd be more than happy to answer them. Yeah, you in the back.
When like saying when to go work like Marvel or DC,
I can't hear you, I'm sorry.
when you work at when you're working at your big companies, how was it when you like had to deal with rejection? How did you take that person? How did you kind of
Oh, rejection? Oh, you get that's 99% of what you have before you get in. Easy. You have to have them when you're rejected. You cannot take it to heart. You cannot take it to heart, because if you do, it's going to consume you and you're going to hate yourself and you're not going to want to do the art anymore. You're not going to want to do anything with it. A lot of the editors that are in these larger companies, if they think you're good, they will tell you what avenues to go down. A lot of times you're just going to get a form letter. Dear fill-in name, we think that your work needs improvement, blah, blah, blah. And I've seen it, it's a form letter. And then they send it out, they put like a pretend stamp on it and then they send it out and that's it. You know, and it's rather hard to get into with some of these people to try and show these portfolios. I mean, you can't even really do them at conventions anymore because a lot of the larger companies, they don't do those conventions anymore, especially with social media. I mean, you can just do everything remotely now at this point. You know, but when you get rejected, it's something you just have to understand, that they're going to do it regardless of how good you are. It doesn't matter, because they're going to want to, if you're really, really good and they still reject you, they're going to want to see if you're still into it, if like your spirit's not going to be broken as a result of being rejected. You know, you just got to keep going and try and improve, or take to heart what they tell you that you need improving. And even when you get rejected, I mean, even ask some of your friends who will be honest with you, or any other professional who will be honest with you and say, what do you think needs working? And then if someone tells you what it's going to be, then, you know, take it to heart and just keep doing it. I mean, after a while, it doesn't take as long as anyone thinks to improve on a certain aspect of your drawing. I mean, for a while, I had an issue drawing faces and hands. I just couldn't get the geometry of it right. And sometimes I still can't, but it doesn't stop me. I mean, I just keep continuously learning. I keep continuously drawing. And, you know, you get better at it. You know, so if you're rejected for anything, don't take it to heart. Keep trying. Keep trying. Keep getting better, because that's what all artists are supposed to do anyway. They're supposed to keep getting better without any type of goal of finishing in sight. Because if you finish, if you feel like you've learned everything that you need to learn, you're never an artist to begin with, because there's no such thing as stopping learning when it comes to creating. Any other questions here? Yes?
What qualifications did you have when you started your first comic book job?
None. Whatever I had, I studied independently. You know, I was very lucky, but I studied independently. I knew, the one thing I did was I did research as to what putting together a comic book entails, of what disciplines a comic book artist needs to have. I mean, for me, just as a comic book artist, what I needed to do was learn figure drawing, like the proper proportions of the human body, you know, whether it's tall or large or anything. I mean, just the basic proportions, you know, chest, legs, torso, arms, you know, wherever everything goes. Even if the person's shaped differently, you learn a little bit of anatomy of animals, and you take a look at some of the reference that you would see from Lord of the Rings, for example. How do you draw a troll? Well, let's see if I can do it a different way. You also have to learn a little bit of perspective when it comes to that, because you're not going to have just a drawing of just a person just standing right here like this the whole time, because the way scenes are staged, there has to be a little bit of an angle, a little bit more of a choreographic nature to it. You know, so it's like you're gonna study a little bit more perspective, like a bird's eye view, a worm's eye view, you know, 1 or 2 or 3 point perspectives, you know, to emphasize the story and the scale of the story that you're telling. There's also, what else is there? Oh God, yes, the most important part of it actually is the staging and the choreography of the page itself. That's the most important part. What I did, I studied film. I will show a couple of things that I swear on. There's a book that I have. It's called Film Directing Shot by Stephen Katz. It's my Bible. It taught me everything I needed to know about how to stage a scene when it comes to, you know, doing something visual. I mean, granted, it's more of a storyboarding book, but if you really think about it, a comic book is a storyboard, but it's just like a storyboard, but with different sized panels and less panels in order to tell the story. You know, I mean, because a storyboard can have like 20 panels just showing one scene with one person reacting. Whereas in a comic book, you're gonna have one, and then you have to go to the next scene, then you have to go to the next camera shot and the next camera shot, and you gotta make it look like it's flowing, even if it seems a little bit broken. So those are the main disciplines you have to have. You should know figure drawing, like the proper proportions of the human body, even if they're a little bit heroic or a little bit like hugely muscled or something. Perspective when it comes to 1, 2, and 3 point perspective of drawing to make it look like it's a 3-dimensional drawing and make it real. And then there's the storytelling aspect, which is the most important part, you know, because what your job is as a comic book artist is to draw in the reader into the story. Your job is to draw in the reader into the story and to make it seem interesting and give it life. You're supposed to take the script that you have and you're supposed to give it a visual life. And that's your job. And if you do anything just like your standard, like 1 point perspective all the time, I mean, you can't do like a Paul Wes Anderson movie all the time where it's just one thing, where it's just like the camera straight ahead. You can't do that all the time with comics, especially with comics, you know. But yeah, you have to have some knowledge of discipline with that. And that's what I did. You know, I bought a couple of books on perspective. I studied perspective. I studied camera staging like a fiend. I did, because that's the most important part of the book, the story. You know, so being at least learned in all of those crafts will help you a lot. All right, anybody else? Yes?
Would you say, of course, like this specializing in characters and anatomy and all like that, would you say you had to spend an equal amount of time learning things like architecture and things like that for world building?
It depends. It depends how quickly you put it together. It depends on how fast you adapt to it. I mean, the world building, as far as that's concerned, if you're doing, that's okay. If you're putting together, if you're putting together an environment, I'm assuming this is for gaming, correct?
Yeah, for comics and all that as well.
Okay, well, as far as world building is concerned, the only thing you really have to worry about, you see, because world building, these are inanimate objects. You know, these are inanimate objects that you can just draw in a perspective, like in a 1 or 2 or 3 point perspective. You can be learned in that, but like if I'm going to put anything into an order of importance, I would take the storytelling or the film choreography and the figure drawing, and I'd put them on the same level, and just below it would be the perspective of the drawings and the architecture, because architecture, it's there to enhance the story that's being told by the characters. You know, like the Batcave. You know, like if you have the Batcave with the dinosaur and the big penny and then the big computer and all that stuff, it's there. You know that it's there, but you also have to know, on an architectural standpoint, where you're staging the characters. And when it's like, let's say, I wish I had a chalkboard here. Like, let's say you have the big penny dinosaur thingy, and you have the computer over here, and then Batman's over here, and the camera's facing this way. We're gonna see this, we're gonna see the computer. But then all of a sudden, if the story comes around within 180 degrees, because that's as far as you really should go, you're over here, the camera points over here, and then you have the dinosaur with the big penny and stuff like that. You see, as long as you have like the proper staging, the architecture will help itself. But the storytelling works with the architecture just as much as the architecture works with storytelling. You know, but the storytelling helps guide the architecture in which direction you see it. Okay, anybody else? Whew. Come on, it has to be somebody else who wants to ask a question. Not yet? You can definitely, if you feel like you can ask a question later, you can definitely ask one as I'm going along, because what I'm about to do now is I'm about to show you some art that I've done, if I can get to the other camera. Let's go to that one over there. Okay. Hey, hello. Yeah, this one. What? This one, yeah, this camera, whatever here. It should be go over to the other ones. It's okay, don't worry about it. Ta-da! Okay. All right. Well, we're going to get to a little bit of art here. This is some of the stuff that I've drawn. Now, this is only like a handful of stuff I have because I don't have a truck to bring in all the art that I've done. So, this is what I mean when it comes to staging. This is one of the pages that I'll show you that it comes to staging. What we have here is an establishing shot. Now, if anybody knows anything about Marvel, this is the Watcher. Now, according to the script that I have for this particular page, the Watcher is just taking a look outside of his big old base, and then he sees something on the outside. Like what I do is I want to establish where the scene is taking place. So I have this. Okay, it's like, okay, the Watcher Citadel in the blue area of the moon, and we know it's the moon because we have the Earth over here in the background. And then we cut over. There's going to be a little bit of dialogue, so the dialogue goes from here, leads into here, where you have a closer view on the other side of the Citadel, where the Watcher is looking out, if you see that figure over there. And then we pull into a dramatic close-up right over here of the Watcher just hanging out, looking out into space, going, wow, it's a pretty night. And all of a sudden, out of nowhere, which is what's going to go to the next page, which unfortunately I do not have with me, you see an over-the-shoulder shot, because it's right here is the Watcher's head and the shoulders over here. An over-the-shoulder shot of the Watcher looking towards this enigmatic figure that's flying towards his home. Now, this is what I'm talking about when it comes to the staging, because what I have here is I have the Watcher framing the action. And if you can see his eyes are looking towards the object of interest. And that's going to subconsciously draw the eye right over here. And that's what's going to happen over here, because in the next scene, which unfortunately I did not finish the page, he crashes through and he lands at the Watcher's feet. Now, here I have, let me see if I even have the right sequence, blah, 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 blah. Okay. What I have here, this is from chapter 3 of my graphic novel. Now, this over here is obviously the bad girl. Now, I didn't finish inking this because, quite frankly, I'm lazy. So I did that. And she's hitting our hero with everything that she has, with the resultant action over here. It's going from left to right, and it's going from a smaller perspective over here, which is creating depth. And then you come over here to this this bottom panel over here, where we have a worm's eye view, which is the term used for anybody who's like, you know, excuse me, I'm a little dry. Sorry about that, thank you. What I have over here is the camera is looking up on the floor. And once again, I used framing over here by some of the damaged furniture, because all this action's taking place in a house. So it's like you see her flying across and she hits the wall over here. So once again, I'm leading the action and I'm framing the action while keeping the visual size of the page in and of itself that way. And now this other page over here where I have it retaliatory, where it's like the girl is trapped. The one who just got thrown against the wall was trapped into the wall. And then the same girl who did the attack notices, oh great, she's about to break out. And then we have a little bit of like a close-up here to emphasize what's going to happen. Like you're drawing into the character and how powerful she's supposed to be. Like she's ready to strike. She's like, it's my turn now. And then you have this where it's like she uses whatever magic and arcane abilities to blast the bad girl in the face, and she is just completely rocked. And then we have her being catapulted, and it leads to this panel over here where even I did it in Photoshop where it's like she lands with a pronounced thud on the edges of stairs, and that does not feel good. Trust me when I tell you. So there's that. Over here's the cover. And over here is some of the earliest stuff that I've done. This is when I stopped working over at Marvel and DC Comics, and this is one of my first ones. It's an anthropomorphic tale of mice and man. That's what the title of the book was. And just like I did before, I established a scene where it's like you have the rabbit man creature thing, and his ears perk up a little bit. He's like, wait a minute, I hear something. And he's like, all right, you need to get back. There's something coming towards us. And this frog knight over here is saying, I don't believe it. But then he believes it after the car just slams into the ambulance over here. Where what I'm doing is, once again, I'm going from this end over here where the action is leading, right over here, and it brings this car, and it just smashes into the ambulance over here. And both of them duck. And both of them like jump out of the way, and what I did was I had the rabbit character jump towards us, which gives depth to the page in and of itself. And you have the other character here, and then after the resultant action, you see the secondary character going, what the hell was that? And he's just like, oh, I really don't think you want to take a look because it's really big, you know. And it's just, this over here, when he says this, it's a pretty big thingy over here that you're going to see. It leads into the next page, which I don't have with me, but is a 800-pound silverback gorilla who just decided to throw a card because he had nothing else to do. And over here, this is a samurai story that I had. This is after a big battle with a bunch of spider creatures. They're like, okay, well, where did everybody go? Well, they just decided to leave. And then they hear a voice coming from the shadows. He's like, oh my God, it's her. And he's surprised. He's like, I thought you were dead. And he's like, me too. But it turns out she's not. So she emerges from the shadows. And then the panel goes over here. It's like, where did you go? What happened? And then she goes, well, this happened. So she proceeded to kill the evil Spider Queen. And it's like, here, look, I brought dinner. You know, so that was really about it. And you see, every single page, even though it's part of a story, is telling a certain part of the story. And the last panel is supposed to lead into the other part of the story in and of itself. But what you're trying to do is not only you're trying to tell the story, but you're also trying to keep it interesting, and you're also trying to make sure that the last panel here leads into either the next act or the continuous or the continuity of the event that's unfolding right now. Because after this, they discuss what happened, they discuss what they're going to do next, and then they all say, all right, let's camp out for the night. Let's get out of here first, and we'll camp out. And the evil person who's hunting her down is like, I'll get you, my pretty, and your little samurais too, and stuff like that. So there's that. Now, I'm going to turn this over, if I may, just to put that there. Now, how a page is put together, there's about 5 stages to it, and there's a bunch of people that are involved. The first person that's involved is the writer, obviously. The writer submits the story to the editor, and then once the editor approves the story, he takes the story and he gives it back to the writer, because the writer usually puts together a plot. Once the writer puts together a plot, he finishes the script. I mean, that's what I would do anyway, and he proceeds to send it over to the penciler, which is who I would be. And then afterwards, the penciler would send it to the inker, which I also am. But here's how it's done. What I wrote over here, this small sampling of what would be considered a script. Now, I'm looking at the script sample right over here. It says Thor versus the Destroyer. And I was like, here's the page 1. This is what the writer is envisioning as he's trying to tell the story. Where it's like, page 1, panel 1, OTS, or over-the-shoulder shot of Thor at the bottom panel as the Destroyer is walking towards him on the upper area of the panel. So in capitals, the dialogue is here. It's like, so metal monster. Now, as I read through all this, I'm getting a visual idea of what the writer's trying to convey when it comes to anything visual. So then over here, panel 2 is a close-up of Thor looking towards the right off panel. Thor is angry. You have killed and killed again. You have caused havoc, destruction, and death throughout Asgard. And then over here, just to keep the narrative going, to keep the action flowing, the writer over here has me draw a medium shot of Thor's forearm gripping Mjolnir tightly as Mjolnir begins to power up with lightning energy. You know, like it's building up, like the tension is building up because you see, first you're going to see like you can see the destroyer approaching Thor, who's obviously menacing. He's twice the size of him, and he's not there to like, you know, make food or anything with him or go to lunch with him. He's going to try and kill Thor. So Thor is gearing himself up to fight this creature. So off panel, Thor is like, the killing is the only thing that motivates you. Your motivation, however, coupled with my rage, you know, something corny, you know, even though you have like the periods afterwards within a comic book page or with a comic book word balloon is supposed to continue into the next panel. So what I have here on the bottom here is a half-page spread of Thor delivering a hellacious uppercut with Mjolnir, which will send a destroyer almost flying off the panel towards the reader, which would be us. And Thor will be in the background, even though he has one hell of a swing. He's like, just to like start over again, it's like, your motivation, however, coupled with my rage, will be the end of you, and crack-a-thoom. So, you know, with the big special effects. So it's meant to be a really good shot. So what I do is I just take what I read and I just make myself a very, very dirty thumbnail, just like this. You know, I mean, you don't have to do anything crazy. You don't have to set up like a Photoshop file of a certain size or anything, because no matter how much you work on it, you're never going to get it right the first time. I don't, but for this time I will, because I already drew it out. So, but I'm just going to show you exactly what I see according to the words. Now, over here, the first panel over here, over the shoulder shot of Thor. The bottom panel, the destroyer walking towards us on the upper area of the panel. So what I would do is I would just do a really loose drawing of like of the destroyer. He's about to get Thor, and I would have it over here. Here's Thor with the cape, you know, and the hammer. I'm gonna kill you, Thor. You're dead. Blah blah blah. So then I have the second panel over here, where it's the close-up of Thor. He's looking towards the right off panel, and Thor's angry. What I'm going to do is I'm going to have a really gross close-up of him right over here, like this. And this is where the perspective comes in, because if I do this like this, he's looking up. This is where like 3-point perspective would come in, because it's like you have the shape of his head. If you have like this is 1, 2, and 3 points, even though it's something really innocuous like just his face, you're going to see his face in that perspective. And you have to draw the human body in that perspective, or the jaw in that perspective. And it's a lot more difficult than anybody thinks that they can do just, you know, offhand. You know, this takes a while to figure out things and for it to be natural. So you have this over here, and he's like, blah, 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 I hate your face, you're ugly. You know, and just to make it a little more dramatic, you have a little bit of the wind coming off. It's like, yeah, it's blowing my beautiful blonde hair, even though my eyes are really angry. So there's that. He's looking at him. He's like, I'm going to kill you, man. And then just like over here with the third panel, the medium shot of Thor's forearm gripping Mjolnir tightly as it's beginning to power up with energy. What I do is whenever I draw, and first off, the one thing I do, whenever I draw any type of anatomy, I draw with blocks and shapes and stuff like that, instead of putting everything in, because I'm going to refine it later in the drawing in and of itself. So there's this, and it's like here. And here's the hammer. It's all crackling with energy. You know, again, this is a very, very rough idea, and it's best when you have an idea and you scribble it down really quickly. Because if you, at the very least, if you have it down, you have at least some form of an idea of what it's going to look like when it's finished. Agua good. Anyway. Excuse me. So what we have here is we have this drawing right over here. Excuse me again. And that's what the drawing is supposed to be for this particular one. Now, here's this one. This one's fun because usually, excuse me again, my goodness. Usually, whenever you have any type of action scene, to emphasize how powerful the shot is, sometimes you want to get it and hit it off panel. Like you want to like have it break some of the panel borders or something. So what I did was, here's the destroyer. He's getting smacked right over here. And sometimes if you feel like it, you can just turn the page around and make sure you get the proper perspective on it. Like right over here. You know, this is the resulting recoiling of getting smacked in the face with a uru hammer, which is not pleasant. So you have this over here, and you give the illusion that he's flying away from the impact. Now over here, what you have over here is you're trying to lead the action from the action to the reaction. Now the action obviously is Thor hitting the destroyer with his hammer. So you're going to have it here, and you're going to have Thor really accentuate how much power he has behind that swing. Like he's really trying to hurt him, like he's really trying to just destroy him with one shot. So what you do here, for me anyway, is I have like just basically a skeleton with a little bit of form to it right over here. And then I throw a little bit of flair over here, like showing some of the other elements like his hair or his cape or whatnot. You know, I even throw in a little bit more of a skeletal frame or something like that, so I know where his chest is going to be. I know where his legs are going to be. And I know where his arm is going to be, his other arm, you know, recoiling from this. And then you have the action lines that just go like this. It's like pow, and then the guy's messed up, and he's falling over here. You see, that to me is what I would do for the layout of this entire page. So in about 15 minutes, I figured out all the action that's going to be on the page. Now, a lot of times, most of the time, in fact, I would send this particular file in. I'd take a picture of it, and I'd send it to my editor in Messenger or whatnot. And I would say, this is the script. This is what I see for page 1. And he'll look at it and say, wow, this looks great. Can you draw this? I go, yeah, I can take care of it now. So that's exactly what we're going to do here. Because what I'm going to do right now, live, is I'm going to draw this right here and right now. Whoop, sorry about that. Let me just put that together. Ooh, I can't believe I figured out how to do that so quickly. Okay, so here we are. And we're going to draw this right here. Now, what I usually do, once I figure out the thumbnail for everything, what I do is I blow it up, and then I lightbox it underneath, and right over here, like if I may, right over here, like right, I don't think you can see it. That's all right, doesn't worry about it. What I do over here is I take a blue line pencil. I have an issue seeing grays. I don't think it's an actual medical condition. I guess my eye is just lazy. And what I do here is I have a simple blue line lead, and it goes the opposite color from the gray, so I'd be able to see it a lot better. Because what I like to do is I like to get a basic layout, not just of the form, but of some of the definition that's there or some of the parts of the armor that's already there. Like if you notice here, for the destroyer, he has these little spikes going up and down his arm, going up and down his leg. And then I have Thor over here with a much more reasonably seen musculature, you know, the bending of the arm, because no arm is absolutely straight whenever you swing anything. Even if you extend it, there's a little bit of bend at some points or another, simply because of the structure of the bone. You know, and then you have, I decided to go with this classic costume with the 4 dots on the top and 2 dots on the bottom, and the big flares on the bottom over here where his legs are supposed to be, and the big T with the wings on it. Hey, look, I'm Thor. Really? You're Thor? Yeah, it hurts. But anyway, you know, it's just like you have this. And I have the cape billowing behind him. You know, it's all powerful and stuff like that. And you have the Uru hammer, and here's another part where perspective comes to play. Like you see something like that? I mean, it's like you have the hammer, it's being swung, and the hammer, the butt end of the hammer, technically is closer to us than the end of the hammer, which is doing the damage. But if you take in perspective, this is where the handle is going, and the handle is going off here. So then you have, if you could see what I'm doing, just in the laws of perspective going to a vanishing point, the ends of the hammer are going off to this vanishing point, which is off panel. So just something like that something as simple as that enhances a scene because it gives it more of a realistic look. Like if you decided to just make a big block over here, you're gonna know it's wrong just by the way you see it. You can't tell or say exactly what it is, but you know it's wrong. So that's why you have to use a lot of different disciplines in order to draw a comic book page or to tell a story, one way or the other. So what I do is now that I have this here, let me just turn this around this way. All right, very good. All right, because I don't want the shadow here. There you are. Yeah, that'll be just fine. Now what I have here, I have my mechanical pencil, which is actually a lead holder. It has this little camera thingy. It has this little claw thingy where it's like I press right over here. It extends the claw, and I take the lead. It's a 2mm lead. I usually like working in an H lead because I press really hard onto the page, and a lot of times if I use a softer lead like a bead, the lead is going to break. So what I do is I just do that. Now if you'll give me a second, I'm just going to sharpen this a little bit with my trusty blade because I hate sharpeners. They're unreliable and they clog too easy, but that's just me. I'm old school, I'm just old, whatever. So anyway, here's how we do it. Since I have the blue as a guideline for everything that I want to put down, and since I've done this so many damn times, I have a very good idea of where everything is going to go. And this is where I finish some of the work. I'm going to draw the Thor figure here. And then after I finish this, I already have another panel drawn already. Once I finish this over here, I'll show you how I ink. And trust me, it's a lot of fun. Now this is something that doesn't take a few minutes to do. Some of you that I've already heard of, and some of you, I'm sure, it takes a little bit longer than a few minutes to draw a comic book page, which of course it does. It takes a little bit more than a few minutes to draw anything really. But trust me, for me, this is time well spent. Now you see how like the form of the blue line gives me the ability to just pencil in everything that's there. That's what I'm doing right now. Don't be afraid to move the paper around if you have to, to go along with your natural range of motion when it comes to drawing. So this is how I put together something, and this is how I draw a page. And it's how a lot of other professionals draw a page. It all comes down to the ability to tell a story visually and to understand what the writer of the story, if it's not you who's writing it, is trying to convey. So does anybody have any questions? I'd be more than happy to answer them if anybody has any questions or if anybody wants to just watch or just, ask anything because I'm definitely a talker, especially when I draw.
Yeah. Would you say even though it's more time consuming to do the blue lines and then do the penciling after, would you say it's worth it?
It's absolutely worth it because if you do the blue line, you know what you're drawing. If you just decide to all of a sudden just draw it, just straight, there's a more than 50% chance along the lines after your second drawing, you're going to get the perception wrong. Or you're going to look at it and go, I did not want to put this down. And then you're going to erase it. And you're going to wind up spending more time erasing anything that you don't like than you will if you just draw it without the blue line. This is just for me. This just works for me. If anybody has any other way of doing things, that's great. I'm not trying to pigeonhole anybody when it comes to what technique they should use or how they should do things. This is just the way that I do things. And for me, it works because, I've done this for years and years. And, because I got better at it, I got quicker at it. And the perspective of it is that it's just like, this is just something that works for me, but it doesn't have to work for anybody else. If it works for anybody else, that's great. If they do something else that's even more efficient than what I do, that's even better. Because the only thing I'm here to do is just to show you what I do and how I do. And if anybody can figure out a better way to do it, please, by all means, do. Because I'm certain there is a much better way of doing this than the way that I'm showing you. But for me, and I'd hazard a bunch of other people, it's the most efficient because you get to see what you're working over. You get to continuously see what you're working over. Like you see how I'm just, you see, it's hard for me to see it over here because I'm at an angle where I can't see the blue and the gray very well. But with the camera pointing down here, I mean, it's obvious you could tell where I'm leading and where everything's going here. You know, so. I had over here, and this is the part also where your construction of human anatomy is very important. Because now you're trying to draw the muscles that go according to the way that this goes. You see right over here is the brachialis that goes into the triceps brachii right over here. And what you have over here is Thor holding the hammer, but his hand is curved a little bit because it's the way that he's holding the hammer at this point. And now we have this over here. Like you see where I'm going with this? Because now that I have the blue line and how it works, it's giving me a guide to where everything can go and sometimes it's a guide to where everything might not go because, I mean, even when I'm convinced that I have a great layout and I'm ready to go, there are even times where I make a mistake. Oh, there's plenty, as a matter of fact, there's plenty of times where I make a mistake and I decide to adjust things. Like, let's say I wanted to adjust his hand over here. I mean, I'll get to that in a minute. Let's say I have his pectoral muscle over here. You know what, I'll just do that. I'll just do an outline here, rib cage, you know, blah, blah, blah. Now over here, I had his hand, I had his hand right over here, you know, with a fist or something, you know, where it's like it's ready to go, like he's ready to punch. But for me, I don't like the angle I have over here. So even though I still have this over here, you know, what I do is with my blue line pencil, which doesn't show up in scans, by the way. That's the reason. That's another reason why I use it, because after I finish penciling this, I scan it with a large scanner, and then everything's ready to go. It doesn't pick up the blue line because the blue line's invisible on the scanner, but the gray line or the ink line is not. So again, it's a great visual aid if you can use that. So instead of having the hand over here, I decide I'm going to put it over here. So here it is, boom. And just from that simple thumbnail that I just did, now I have this over here. You see what I'm talking about? So yeah, a blue line, I mean, at the very least, a thumbnail layout beneath the finished drawing, or what's going to be the finished drawing, to me is very essential. It's very essential. So now we have over here. You see, I even made a mistake over here with like the design of the circle on his chest. So I decided to move it over a little bit. You see, because it also, in case you make a mistake, it's there as a guide to show you where the mistake is. So then I'm like, oh, wow, that doesn't look so great. So let me fix that up a little bit. So now we have this over here. It also helps to know the anatomy of the human body over here, because right now what we have over here, if you look at the musculature of the back, it's latissimus dorsi, right behind the anterior deltoid, right over here, which leads up, the anterior deltoid goes to the median deltoid, which goes to the posterior deltoid, or yeah, it's the posterior deltoid, which goes into the chest muscle, I forgot, pectorals, right over here. And underneath the pectorals is the serratus muscles over here, and then you have the obliques, which are right over here. You can see how that goes? All these muscles, like, you know, they all tie in. And they help accentuate the motion of the body. They accentuate the strike that Thor is getting because it's obvious he's using his muscles to really swing it and to really hit him. And that's how a lot of this works, so it does a lot of good if you have a very, very good knowledge of musculature, of the human body. And I'm not afraid to say that there are times when it's difficult for me to just pick it out of my head. So I do use reference. Like I'll take up Google and I'll go, okay, can we get a picture of someone throwing a spear or swinging an axe, which is where I got this from. So it's like, okay, I'll just take a little bit of the reference of the motion of the arm, and then I'll throw everything else in, and that's it, which I have. So we have this over here. And now I'm drawing the rest of Thor's costume. Let me just draw this over here because I want to get to the inking part. I wonder if anybody here has any drawings with them. I wonder if anybody has, because that would be great if I could take a look at some of this stuff. You know, after the session, of course. I mean, it could be one way or the other, so. All right, so we have that. All right, let's.
I got a quick question.
Yes.
What kind of paper, pencil materials do you use for your drawing?
Okay, your standard. I'm sorry. Your standard paper is. Well, I usually use 2-ply or 3-ply Bristol. It's a little bit thicker than what you have over here, which is 275 250 GSM. But I can't seem to find any denser Bristol paper, so this would have to do. It still holds ink very well, but I use A3 size Bristol. Yeah, I always use A3 size Bristol. And the pencils that I use are this is a Kohinoor retractable lead holder, which is actually a tool for architects. And what they do is they take the lead over here, they slide it in, and then they have a circular type of sharpener, which I hate because after a while those things clog and they're impossible to clean. But I use these. And these are the leads that I get. They're like maybe eight or 9 quid over at your average art store. You can get those anywhere. Again, I usually use like an H lead, like a 2H, you know, because I press really hard on the lead itself onto the paper, and it's almost like I'm scribing into it instead of actually drawing into it. You know, so there's that. Anybody have a question? Yes?
Is the colour added traditionally or digitally after the inking?
Nowadays, digitally.
Yeah.
Nowadays, digitally. When I was working at Marvel, what they would do is they would take they would take the original size boards and they would photocopy them at 65%, and they'd make proper black and whites. And the color, there would be a lot of colorists on staff, and what they would do is they would take markers, something as basic as markers. And it's almost like a coloring book. They would take the markers, they'd color in the marker, and then they'd have to put in the CMYK numbers next to it to show. It's just like, okay, use this color here, use this color here. And they'd have to put like the CMYK numbers next to it for the printing press to like put in whatever percentage of ink that's going to go on that particular plate. Now you just throw it in Photoshop and you're good. That's it. You know, it's like you provide a base and then you provide shading and then you provide highlights, special effects, and you're good. It still takes a little bit more than like an hour, but still it's really refined in a lot of ways when it comes to the coloring of it. But yeah, Photoshop or Clip Studio Paint, but the standard is Photoshop, really. You know, so there's that. You know, so now that we have this over here, you know, again, there's the musculature, you know, a little bit more. I'm just like putting a little bit more detail in there. I'm probably going to finish this when I get home today, you know, whatever, because it's like watching me draw that for 1,000 years is going to be a little bit testy. And now we go to this part over here. Now this is what I did a lot. Now, a lot of times I would get the pencils like this. A lot of times they'd be sloppy, and a lot of times they'd be terrifyingly bad. But a lot of times they'd come out decent. Now what I did, just like my friend Nikki, just like my friend over here, who was it? Was it you who talked about Chasing Amy?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. You see, Chasing Amy is a movie about a comic book inker, and inkers are known to be tracers, and we kind of are. But the job of an inker is an unsung one, because what we try and do is we take a 2-dimensional drawing and we give it a 3-dimensional pop, and we give it a little bit more of like a visual stylization of it. You know, I'm no longer an inker for anybody else because I draw my own stuff and I do very good, so haha. So, but anyway, what I do is I dip into like this India ink over here. It can be any type of India ink. I choose Dr. Martin's ink because it has the best density of any pencil, any ink that I have. And the brush that I use, even though it's a little bit broken here, is a Winsor Newton Series 7 number 2 Natural Sable. This is something I've been using since I started at Marvel. And these brushes are really the go-to brushes. I mean, you can get Raphael's or you can get other natural sable brushes, but this is what I've always used. So I'm gonna illustrate inking with a brush just a little bit over here when it comes to the smoothness over here. Now again, like I said before, the Black India ink that goes over the pencil mark is supposed to enhance it and actually make it a lot sharper and make it easier for the colors to put down the colors. You know, and to give, again, to give the drawing a three-dimensional pop. So what I do is I provide a decent outline like right over here. And yes, it takes a very steady hand to do this. So you have this over here. Let me just move that camera a little bit. You see how I have that? Something along those lines. Every line has a meaning. Every single line has a meaning. The one thing that an inker has to do also is fluctuate the thickness of the line and fluctuate the texture of the line, because not everything is the same. Not every object within a page has a set density or a set type of makeup. Like a lot of times if I'm inking just hair, obviously I'm going to use a very wispy line like this one over here. You know, something like this. But if I'm going to draw if I'm going to ink over something that's going to have any type of weight to it, like a helmet, what I do is I provide a heavier line on the bottom, which accentuates not just the weight of the object of itself, but also separates it from the rest of everything, as well as give it a different feel when it comes to putting it together. See how I have that there? Now I'm just going to ink this helmet over here, if I may. This part of the helmet anyway. So we do this here. Now a lot of times, whenever an inker gets any type of pencils, a lot of times the inker is just meant to like ink over the actual drawing in and of itself. You know, I mean, not really do anything crazy except accentuate the parts that are really important to it. However, there are times when a little bit more flair for the dramatic is involved. And maybe you want to, depending on the light source, maybe you want to add a couple of things extra to it, you know, just to accent the look of it. And a lot of pencilers, believe it or not, if they get a good inker working over them, you know, they're going to love the additions that an inker usually takes, you know, especially if it doesn't really harm the work too much. All right, so that's just an example of what I do with a brush, but I also use another tool here. It's called a quill. Now, it's just like the Declaration of Independence when it was signed. You have a little quill right over here, but it's not a feather. You have a quill over here. It's just a little nib that goes into this holder right over here. And it's just as simple as like, you know, dipping it into the ink, just like I did with the brush. Make sure I have any excess off of it. And this, what this does here, provides a little stronger, sharper, and thinner direct line on it. Like you see how I have that there? You know, I've inked for so long before I went into penciling that my hands are just too steady for anything else, to be honest with you. I mean, I could just do this all day. But this is like years of practice. Like you see how I got that feathering in there? The feathering is meant to show like a transition from black to white. And it's supposed to mimic the properties of a gray tone. But you see, like I have here, like if I put down an X over here, that means spot it with black. What I'm doing also, excuse me with this one. What I'm also doing with this one is that I'm putting in all the fine details and like any of like the molding within the helmet of itself. That's something that I can do with a brush, but I prefer to do it with a quill because the line is a lot stronger. Even though it's thinner, it's a lot stronger and it's a lot more precise because there's resistance at the end of the quill whenever you put it in there. Whenever you use a quill, there's resistance against the paper more because the quill is actually pushing into the paper. It's actually scribing into the paper in and of itself. It's actually going in on a very, very small scale into the fiber of the paper itself. Like you can see right over here, I mean, it's rather faint, but I've already picked up a little bit of the fibers at the end of the nib already. You know, and that's not good. You have to get rid of that because if it doesn't, then you're going to have that type of thickness and everything is going to mess your drawing up. So you just wipe it clean a little bit here and there.
Is there a specific technique to not put too much ink on the quill?
No. What you do is you just dip it moderately. You just dip it a little bit moderately here. And if you feel like you've put a little bit too much, you just scrape some of it off on the other side. I mean, there's no set measurement on how much ink can go into a quill, but you don't want to put too much of it because if you do, and if you have an issue with the quill at the end of the nib, what it'll do is it'll ball up and it'll just fall into like this big drop. And then you're going to have to be very careful when it comes to removing that said drop. And, you know, you'll have to thank the gods for creating whiteout because a lot of times that's just not going to work. All right, so we have this. Let's just do this one more time. Yes?
Do you usually have a backup? Because, like, for example, if an inker makes an irreversible mistake.
Yeah, whiteout. That's it. Really whiteout. Or I use Photoshop. You know, I use Photoshop in case there's anything that I see that I don't like, I'll just go in with the tool after I scan it and I'll just like, you know, just correct it in Photoshop. It's a lot easier now to do it, but when I was younger, when I was a pro, younger, I'd have to let it dry for a bit, put some whiteout on it, wait until that dries, and then go over it with a very, very light felt marker because obviously the texture of the whiteout is far more delicate than the paper itself. So I have to be very careful when I do that. Or I have to or what I do is I take a piece of paper and I redraw that part of it, and then I attach it to the page in and of itself, and then I rescan it. But you know, with the advent of Photoshop, it's made things a lot easier and a lot more efficient. Now, inking is a slowly dying profession, and I'm actually glad about that because for a long time when I was an inker, like I got so much work as an inker, I never really had time to figure out my skill as a penciler because that's what I always wanted to do. But I mean, quite frankly, the money was too good as an inker, you know, for me to just all of a sudden give it up. I mean, I was making at one point I was making 150 American a page. That's about 3,600 per issue, I think, or a little bit less. My math's terrible. But, you know, sitting on my butt for 4 hours a day doing this, not bad. You know, it's a nice living when you can have it, but it greatly limits you because inking is a very, very niche thing. Like, you really can't do it anywhere else. I mean, it's not like you can get a job as an inker at a tattoo parlor or at a book publishing house. You know, it's like you need to be a much more well-rounded creator, especially nowadays because nowadays things are so easy to do when it comes to that. Close-ups, like, can I adjust this camera?
So it's the button on top. So it's the little grey one, I think.
Oh, which one?
This little button here.
Okay.
So that should zoom in. Oh no, that might be the focus. Yeah, that's all.
Okay.
Okay, there's a snapshot or something that will move.
Yeah, well, we're not doing that.
There we go. So it's this one,
All
this
right.
button just here.
Okay, this button, just
Yeah, so
press it again. All right, there we go.
Yeah, and if you press it another time, it will go back out again.
All right, sorry about that, guys. What do you think now? Can you see it? Let me just,
You press the grey one to focus for you.
okay. We're good? Okay, excellent. Yay.
It's not particularly related to inking, but when you're doing like, when you're breaking like the border of the panels and doing it for like momentum or force, if you're drawing like really powerful characters, is it something you do often or you try to reserve for like specific fights or like scenes?
Well, the one thing that I don't like doing is, one thing I don't like doing is drawing something flashy and explosive when it's not necessary. You know what I mean? It's like, if I'm going to draw anything that has anything to do with like a character that has an X amount of power, you know, whether anybody understands it or not, they're still basically baseline human. I mean, even Superman slouches or sits with bad posture. Wonder Woman, she can eat too many tacos one day and just go, oh my God, and just lean back on her chair. Even if she's super heroic or something, you're not supposed, I mean, the only time I'd ever draw anything along those lines like that is if the situation calls for it. Like I have a bunch of colleagues who, in the independent circuit, who do the same thing that I do, but they're not. I can't say they're professionals because they never worked for like the big two, or they never had their work published on a larger scale. I mean, the majority of the time, a lot of these guys rely on crowdfunding to fund their books, and so sad to say, the majority of the books like that, the majority of independent books are a little exploitative, especially about women, and there's a whole bunch of them that, it's like there would be no possible way that anybody would ever go into battle wearing a bikini. You know what I mean? It's like, and then they have the breasts are hanging out, or like they're wearing a thong. You know, sometimes like that, it's kind of ridiculous. You know, I mean, to me, and I find it difficult for me to appreciate that type of art, because all it is just titillation. You know, and that's something I'm not a huge fan of. I mean, the only time I would ever use any type of like exploitative thing or any type of like superhero exaggeration or anything or whatnot is if it suits the story. That's really basically it. You should only do stuff like that as if it's going to suit the story, or if it has a place in the story. And it can never be something that's just gratuitous or exploitative, because if you do that, if you do that a lot and you do that just to basically sell books, you're going to be known as the guy who draws boobs all over the place. And, it's nice for a bit. I mean, you can get some work like that, but no one will ever take you seriously. Like, quite frankly, if I drew a smut comic, I know Nikki would not approach me to do this, because it's like, it's base. It has no manners to it. And it's just sloppy storytelling, and it's sloppy art. And personally, I would never do anything like that. So if you're ever going to do anything that has any type of like exaggerated pose or anything, only do it if it suits the story at that particular moment. Don't do it for the sake of it, just to like get oohs and ahs or likes on social media, because, first off, the likes on social media are hollow and they're useless. That's one thing. The second thing, because that's not going to put food on your table or have an editor hire you for a book, or get anybody to purchase your book if you're publishing independently. But just don't do it just to like keep your artistic soul intact, because it's so easy to sell out, and it's so easy to just like continuously draw stuff like that. I mean, Image Comics did that in the early 90s, and after a while it's like, yeah, great, everyone's running around screaming and killing people, but what's the story about again? I mean, after a while it just gets like to a point where you don't care about the characters at all, because there's no story behind it, and you don't, because a comic book isn't just telling the story about how Spider-Man beats the crap out of Doc Ock. Sometimes there's a little bit of nuances as to why Dr. Octopus is a villain, or why Spider-Man does what he does, why he saves everybody, why he tries to help out as much as he can. I mean, I'm sure everybody, if anybody knows the origin of Spider-Man, his Uncle Ben died because he didn't care about a certain robber stealing from a wrestling show that he went to. You know, and because of that oversight and that arrogance, his Uncle Ben died, and he's trying to atone for it for his entire life. You know, but that's a story behind it. You know, that's the story behind Spider-Man in a nutshell. You know, some of the books that I've seen, it's like, okay, I'm a cybernetic warrior, and I have double D breasts, and look at this monstrous gun that I'm holding that I shouldn't be able to hold because it weighs more than I do with one arm. You know, after a while, it's like, what are you even doing? I mean, yeah, maybe I'm doing a little bit of soapbox stuff, but it's also the truth. If you want to be taken serious as an artist, you have to do serious art. Comic books is very serious art, and I've been in it most, if not more than half my life. You know, if anybody takes the cheap road out, you know, to me, you're kind of missing out, because I learned from some of the best in the industry who've been doing this for much longer than I have. You know, and they passed there was one person, Keith Williams, who passed down his knowledge to me. And I'm not going to betray that knowledge by drawing boobs all over the place or drawing hyper-realistic and disproportionate superheroes just for the sake of doing it because I feel like I can. You know, so that's a very good question. You know, it's just like, only if you're going to draw anything like that, the only reason why you should draw anything like that is if it serves the purpose of the story, and that's it. That's really it. You know? Okay, any other questions?
You say you correct mistakes in Photoshop, so what about fully conditioning?
Well, here's the thing. A lot of times I do my art digitally. I don't use Photoshop, I use Clip Studio Paint. And in my possession, I do have a pen tablet in which I use to digitally ink and even digitally pencil some of the stuff that I do. You know, a lot of times it's like if I'm under a crunch, or if I just want, quite frankly, if I want to get some pages out of the way, I do draw them digitally. But there are other times when it's like, there's a page that I really like and I come up with, and I really want to see it, what it looks like on actual paper, so I do it there. You can technically do it digitally the whole way through. You can if you want to. But again, maybe I'm old school, but there is nothing better than taking a comic book page and holding it like this and showing your friends and going, ah, I love this. And it's like something you can frame. It's tangible. That's why a lot of times I draw traditionally, you know, because it's tangible. I can hold it in my hand. You know, it's something that I created, and I can look at it like this instead of on a screen. You know, because it's like a digital comic. You know, I mean, Stan Lee said it's like, you know, if you see a pretty girl on this, like looking at a comic book is like looking at a pretty girl. You know, if you see a comic book on a computer, you know, if you see a comic book on a computer and you see a pretty girl on a computer, you can't hold the comic book in your hand, you can't give the pretty girl a hug. That's what he would say. I mean, it's a little bit more risque that he said, but I'm using a pretty girl as a hug for something else entirely. But yes, you can draw a comic book entirely digitally if you want to, but if you want to have the authenticity and the feel of actually completing something, to me, it's better if you draw traditionally. Like this page I drew this page 9 years ago. 9 years ago, and it still holds up. Still has a quality of paper. It's yellowed a little bit, but I love that page and a couple of others more than any of the pages that I've drawn over recent time. So, oh God, I'm parched.
Where do you take your inspiration from for what you feel?
Where do I take my inspiration from? That's a great question. Well, I inspire myself, really, because ever since I was a child, I've always wanted to do this. I mean, when I was a kid, when I was about 5 or 6 years old, I would make my own I would make my own fumetti strips, like those the cartoons you'd see in the newspapers, black and white ones. I would make my own stories at like age 5 and 6, and I didn't want toys. I didn't want anything else. I wanted paper and a pencil, and that was it. And I'd get a ruler, and I'd make my own little boxes, and I'd make my own stupid little cartoons or something. And I did that when I was a kid. I mean, when I was 7 years old, I learned how to draw flip books. The very first one I had was a little mouse walking over to a firecracker while it was lit. He ate it, and then the mouse blew up, and it turns out the mouse was pregnant, and all the babies went flying all over the place. You know, this is what went through my head when I was 7. So that's a little scary. You know, maybe I shouldn't have said that. Woo! All right, forget the last. Can you edit that out later? That would be great. But actually, no, keep it in because I want people to be afraid of me. But
I've got a question from Jay, sorry.
all right, Jay, where are you, man? All right, hi.
I was just wondering if you have any advice to building a portfolio.
Advice for what?
Building a portfolio.
Yeah. If you let's say you want to draw for Marvel, all right, and you want to put together a portfolio. The one thing that I would do is try and find a script online that you can download of any type of character, or even a DC comic book character, and then let's say it's Batman, and let's say you can't find a Marvel script and you get a Batman script. You just change the character to like Moon Knight or Captain America or whatnot, and you draw what Captain America is doing the same thing as Batman is doing. Whenever you apply or you want to show a portfolio to a specific company, you want to use their specific characters. Like if you want to do storyboarding for SpongeBob or something like that. If you want to do storyboarding for Nickelodeon, you should draw like make up your own story about the Fairly Odd Parents or Danny Phantom or SpongeBob. You know, to do something like that, showing how you treat their characters. That's the main thing. If you're going to go for something specific, like draw a comic, you're going to want to show the character. You're going to want to show your ability to draw them, to draw the characters that they have, instead of the ones that you could just make up, because they want to see how you treat their characters. Like, will you give them the love and respect that they deserve? Because it sounds corny, but a lot of the editors up there, they really do love their characters, and Marvel definitely loves their characters as well. And when you put all that together, and you make it into a nice cohesive portfolio, and it shows that you care about the heroes, and it shows with the talent that you have and the way you tell a story and how you make their characters look, they'll most likely hire you. But if you're going to go for penciling for Marvel, draw Marvel characters. You know, don't draw Batman and it's like, here, look, he's beating up Captain America. No, they're not going to like that. It sounds silly and juvenile, but it's the truth. Sorry, next please. I have a wealth of information. You can ask me any question you wish. Any. Yes?
I'll go with a basic one that people normally ask. So, do you read a lot of comics?
No.
And if you did read a lot of comics, do you think making them would ruin them for you? So, you know,
Yeah.
people that
Making comics ruined the comics for me because I draw the damn things. What the hell do I want to read them for now? It's like I already draw the stories that I want to do. You know, why would I want to collect them or something? I mean, maybe I'll collect a couple of special edition issues. Like for any George Perez fan out there, they're reprinting JLA Avengers, you know, because unfortunately the man has terminal cancer. He's not going to survive for very long. And George Perez is one of the elder statesmen of comic books. This guy has been drawing over the span of 5 decades from the 70s on. And he's one of the most noted comic book artists ever. Absolutely. He's right up there with Jack Kirby and John Byrne, if any of you know who any of those guys are, or Joe Madureira, or the Kuberts, or I don't even know who's Chris Bacallo or something like that. He's far better than them. And I would pick up a few issues here and there that meant something to me personally. Like I just recently purchased my 10th copy of X-Men number 166 from 1982. And it's only because I lost the other 9 copies of it, because it was the very first comic that I ever actually purchased for myself. You know, but I mean, when I was a kid, I would buy an X amount of comics, but after a while, when I started drawing them, I was like, let's make my own damn stories. I have my own paper. What the hell? No, I don't need any more comics. And quite frankly, I have copies of my comic at home. So, I mean, I don't want to read anybody else's story. I'm too busy concentrating on mine. But when I was younger, yeah, I collected some, but not to a point where it's like I had, like, you know, you couldn't find me in my basement. You know, I would never do that. No thanks. That's too much. All right, yes?
Throughout a whole comic book, is it just one single artist that inks the whole thing, or is there like multiple different artists? And
That's a
if
great
so,
question. Holy shit, that's a
kind of
great
what's the
question.
difference?
Well, Marvel is notorious for always being late. Always, 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 always late. You see, this is the reason why I had so much work, because I was quick and I was good. As an inker, I was very quick and I was very good. And I was telling these guys earlier, I saved a lot of pencilers' careers because they handed in their work late for them, but I finished the work and I would have it in on time on the deadline. But there would be a lot of times where I would be called in to ink about 3 or 4 pages of one story and then 5 or 6 pages of another story because the other inker or the other penciler, they just missed the deadline. So yeah, there's a lot of times where it's like there's more than one artist on a book, quite frankly, because the other artist flakes. And that's a bad thing. That's very, very bad. One second, I'll get to you next. One thing if you work for any of these large companies, you cannot do, I will not emphasize this any more than I am now. Do not miss a deadline. You miss a deadline, you could be replaced in 5 minutes. Not even 5 minutes. It's that easy because especially nowadays, when everyone's sending in their portfolio online, you may have the job, but there's about 500 people jockeying for that same job. And if you screw up and you don't make the deadline, they will throw you away without even telling you. It's happened to me. It's happened to a bunch of friends of mine, and they're still wondering why they got fired. I'm like, well, because you're late. This is what happens. Whoop. Oh my God, I almost spilled the water. Yes?
Do you have any books you'd recommend?
Yes, I do. I have a list of books that I'm gonna give to Nikki, and he's gonna print them out and he's gonna pass them out, or we'll just send it to you by email. The book that I use for my storytelling, excuse me, is a book called Film Directing Shot by Shot by Stephen Katz. This guy's been a choreographer in Hollywood for the longest time, and he's already on his 10th or 12th edition of this book. I have like edition 9. It gives you every single nuance and detail about storytelling in a storyboard fashion. But again, like I said before, a storyboard is just an exaggerated version of a comic. And a comic is a storyboard, but with different sized panels and a lot less panels to convey the story. But you learn so much from that particular book about staging, about how to place the action or how to place a conversation and everything. You take that, coupled with the knowledge, you already have more than half of the problem of putting together a comic book page right away. Because if you tell a good story, people are going to be drawn into it. Now, there's one artist that I know of. His name is Mike Mignola. Now, if anybody's ever heard of Hellboy, he was the artist. Mike Mignola is on the artist staff for the longest time. He was an inker, and he couldn't draw to save his life. But he learned how to draw well enough, and he knew how to stage the action and the pace of the story so well, it became one of the most popular characters in comics history. It's not the best art. It doesn't have to be the best art. If you tell a compelling story and you stage it the right way, that's where it works. So for me, Film Directing Shot by Stephen Katz is personally my Bible. Now, if I want to learn perspective, you want to go as bare bones as possible because you don't want to have to worry about the technical side of things. The book that I use is called Pat Quinn's Perspective for Comics, or Comics for Perspective, or whatnot. It's a 52-page book, and it just goes through the nuts and bolts of all the books, all of the 1.2, 0.3 point perspective. That's it. That's really essentially it. And then the other one that I have, when it comes to writing, personally, I actually graduated university with a bachelor's in creative writing because I wanted to, because I already got the art thing done. I didn't have to worry about it, as far as I knew, to that level anyway. I studied creative writing for an X amount of time through a university, through teachers who knew what they were doing, because it was something that I didn't feel I was good enough at to create a story. So I studied creative writing, and one of the books that I would suggest, especially for comic book writing, is Alan Moore's Writing for Comics. It's another short book. It's about maybe 48 pages or something, and it just goes through the stages. He'll talk about some of the stuff that he's done a little bit because he is a writer. He is going to talk about some stuff. But after a bit, you're going to get maybe about 24 pages of how he puts together a story. And it's masterful. This is the guy who wrote Watchmen. You know, he's a god. He's one of the greatest writers in comic books, period. Truly. You know, I mean, there's hardly anybody better than I know of. So those are the three that I would recommend. I mean, find out whatever you could when it comes to doing anything that you want to do as far as learning the way you want to learn. Now, there's a thing where it's, a lot of time, I emphasize figure drawing a lot. Now, there's a lot of times where if you want to do some figure drawing, it's really cool if you can go to one of those in the basement drawing classes where it's like you have the nude model and you have the big pad of paper and you have the charcoal and you're like, okay, I'm taking a look, blah, blah, blah. And you're in a camaraderie type area where it's like you have a bunch of artists learning from each other and all that stuff. That's great. But if you can't afford it, and a lot of those times it's like maybe 15 to 20 quid for each time you go there to draw. Not everybody has 15 to 20 quid every other night. So what I do, especially with the large monitor that I have at my house, whenever I feel like just drawing, I go onto YouTube. Now, don't laugh, this is the truth. It's called Croquis Cafe, where it's like you have a bunch of models. They're going to be nude. If anybody's objective of that, there's going to be some art. There will be short video clips where the models have skin-tight clothing on, but the majority of them are nude, which is fine. You know, whatever it is, it's human body. Yay. Oh well. We all have butts. You know, so it's just, you know, it's basically it. You know, and what it does is it shows that there's like hundreds and hundreds of models, both male and female, who are going to be in different varieties of poses and musculatures and shapes and sizes and appearances, all that jazz. And the benefit about it is that a lot of times when you have a modeling class, the models are there for like maybe a half hour, and then they have to take a break, and then they have to try and get into the same pose, and they can't, not down to the minutia of everything. If you feel like you're taking a little bit long time on the drawing that you just can't get, you just press pause, and you can spend up to 2 hours on one single thing if you want to. So yes, I mean, if you're going to do anything like that, make sure you have a decent sized monitor, have a decent sized like pad in front of you, look at the screen and go, okay, I'm going to draw this. So yeah, those are the things that I would use because they get a lot of, like the Croquis Cafe, you get a lot of motion. You get a lot of the fluency of the musculature as it moves and where it's moving and all that stuff. You know, and it's like, that's the one thing you want to get down properly is the flow and the nature of the human body as it moves, especially within the story. You know, so those are the 4 things that I would highly recommend because all that stuff saved me from having to pay thousands of dollars per semester at art school, whereas a lot of kids that I know who pay thousands upon thousands of dollars for art school, after they graduate, started working as an assistant manager for a clothing store. And that was the best they were able to get because they thought that with that degree, they thought they were going to be able to conquer the world. And here's another thing. Now, I'm not going to dispel any type of art college that really takes itself seriously. I've noticed that this school takes itself very seriously when it comes to it. So I'm very happy about that because when I lived in the United States, I saw a lot of art schools that would take in kids who had 0 talent. And I'm not even trying to be mean about it. Like they had deep issues trying to draw something, but their parents or their friends told them, hey, you look like a really good artist. Like, wow, I want to go to art school. the art schools will take your money and you'll get your little degree, and then you go out into the world, and then you'll realize that, or that person will realize, wow, I really stink, and I lost all that money. I could have done something else, you know, and now they have all that debt. The majority of people who graduate from art high schools or art colleges, the ones where you have to pay an exorbitant amount and when the teachers don't care about, it's not usually a good thing. You know, I mean, I taught myself everything I needed to know, and I had to, because A, I couldn't afford it, and B, I knew that they wouldn't teach me anything, because the greatest teacher in your life is the mistakes that you make. It's not passing a grade or getting an A and an assignment that took you 3 weeks to finish. Nothing is more of a teachable moment than almost missing a deadline, or almost getting fired, or almost not getting the gig, or almost not doing what you love to do and make a living out of it. I've had the very, very fortunate luck in my life that I've made a more than decent amount of change doing what I do. But trust me when I tell you, it wasn't without effort and a lot of independent studying. You have to want it. Like I said before in the beginning, you have to really want it. You have to really love it, what you do. Because if you don't love it, don't do it. You're just wasting anybody else's time. You know, but any other questions? Yes?
Would you say, as good as it is working for a company and having, like, being hired by them to do specific pages, would you say it's worth the risk of it not being as successful, going and creating your own comic yourself?
It depends on, you see, when you make your own comic, excuse me, when you make your own comic, half the work is the promotion of it. That even takes up more, sometimes that takes up more time than it does creating the damn thing. And it's the truth. You have to, you see, when I created mine, all right, the one thing I knew I had to do was go on podcasts, make everybody aware of what I was doing. I have my own YouTube channel where I go live for about an hour and a half, and I draw pages like this. Like I'll take some of the pages from my graphic novel and I will draw like half a page live, and I'll have people who are watching the show, you know, watching my video, you know, comment and ask me questions, or, you know, I'll goof around with them or something. You see, what you have to do more than anything is promote what you have. And you need to make sure that you have a good story, something that resonates with people. You know, I mean, you're not going to hit a home run out of the park all the time. I didn't. You know, I did well for my first campaign. I did better for my second campaign, but that wasn't without a lot of effort. If you do something for yourself, it'll take longer, but you will be far happier, because you'll never fire yourself. You'll never have to worry about a deadline for yourself unless you tell everybody you're going to have something out at a certain time and you don't have it in a certain time. As long as you do the work and you're happy with what you have, it can take you a whole year to put it out, whatever it is. If it's good and people like it, it will be worth it, and then you'll do more of it, and more and more and more. But again, just like in everything else, since it's yours, you're completely responsible for it. If you screw up and you don't put out any good work, no one's going to buy your book. If you screw up for a large company, they're going to fire you. As simple as that. You know, I mean, again, this is a brutal world. Being a comic book artist is not fun sometimes. With the rejection, with the deadlines and everything, I cannot tell you how many times I had to spend nights without sleep. Like, I did not sleep. Like, there would be a couple of deadlines where I would get to work at 5 o'clock, go back to, like, I lived in New York City. And Marvel was based in New York City. Like, I would, as an inker, I would pick up the pages at 5 o'clock, 5:30 in the afternoon. I would take the subway back to the Staten Island ferry, which is about a half hour. And then the ferry ride from Manhattan to Staten Island is another half hour. And where I lived, it would take about 45 minutes on bus to get back to my house. So we're talking, by the time I get home, it's like 7:30, 8 o'clock. And then I'd have to take these 2 pages that I need to be done by tomorrow, and then I would do them. But they would be so detailed that I have to ink every single nuance of this thing. Inking's not easy. Just because you're painting over the lines, there's a lot of lines. You're essentially redrawing the damn thing. Even though it's a little bit less time you're spending on it without having any erasing, you're really essentially redrawing the page. So it's like you're going about a good 5-6 hours at a clip on these things. Before you realize it, when you finish the first page, it's like 3:30 in the morning. Like, oh shit, I gotta make some coffee. You know, because you have to hand in the page by a certain time, like by around noon, because of the fact that they have to scan it and then they have to send it out to the other artists, like the colorists or the letterers, or they have to send it to the people in the pre-press over in California or over in England, over here, which is 5 hours ahead of New York City. So it's like you have a lot you have to do. There's a lot. And it's like there's been a whole bunch of times where I cannot tell you how many times I spent no sleep. No sleep. I would catch up for sleep the next day, but I'd sleep a good 12, 13 hours, or I would stay up because I'm so wired. There's a lot of sacrifice to this, but it's worth it. It's worth it. If you could do what you love and make money out of it, it's so worth it. It's not even funny. So worth it because it's on you. You did it yourself, and you did it by yourself, and you took all that risks by yourself, and you showed yourself that you can do it. There's nothing better than that. Next, who's next? Yes. Well, Marvel is where I got my start, and I had a lot of friends there. DC Comics treated me with a lot of respect because the penciler that I worked for was a flake, and hardly anybody liked him, but he was good enough that they kept him as a penciler. But they loved me as an inker, so they kept me on as well, which bothered the crap out of the penciler. I don't care, he's an asshole anyway. I'd say both had pros and cons at the same time. I grew up with Marvel. You know, I grew up with Marvel when I was a kid. When I was like maybe 10 or 11, I'd watch Spider-Man His Amazing Friends, you know, with Iceman and Firestar. You know, and some of those like early rerun of those Spider-Man cartoons made in the late 60s, they were all psychedelic and they were all like weird and stuff. It's like, oh my God, if I smoked anything back then, you know, it would be like, what the hell is this? You know, because it was so psychedelic. You know, I loved growing up with stuff like that. Even on some children's programs, they had Spider-Man show up to teach a lesson on spelling. And I'm like, wow, this is great. You know, it's like they had the Fantastic Four, Thor, Iron Man, Submariner, and all that stuff with those. If anybody's seen some of the older animations where actually they're just cutouts of the actual comic book art with the mouths moving a little bit and the really terribly edited action, it was just so cool. I was like, wow, this is really great animation. Oh, this is amazing. But Marvel was my first love when it came to comics. You know, I wasn't keen on Superman because there was my father brought home a Superman comic one day for me, and it was when he was so damn powerful that like how could you possibly write a character that's completely unbeatable? I mean, there was a page, no joke, where Superman sneezed and a galaxy exploded, and I'm just like, wait, what? Wait, even as a kid, I was kind of smart. You know, it was like, you know, I had a pretty decent IQ, and I like read on like when I was like 7 or 8, I read at a collegiate level. You know, and I was doing calculus at that age too. You know, and I figured out biology and all that stuff too. And it's like, even then I knew, I was like, wait a minute, how the hell are you able to sneeze in space? You know, I go to my father, and my father, I love my dad, but he was dumb as a bag of hammers. And I look at him and I go, Dad, look. He goes, what? And I go, Superman is sneezing and the galaxy's being destroyed. And he goes, yeah, Superman's really powerful. And I go, Dad, there's no air in space. There's no air in space. You can't sneeze in space. He's like, yes, you can. I go, what do you mean, yes, you can? You know, no, you cannot. There's no air in space. He's sneezing and a galaxy is exploding. Ew. You know, so I was like, don't ever get me Superman again. Because I was like, you suck. You're too damn powerful for your own good. It's like, ugh. Marvel characters are more relatable because they're powerful, but, you know, they have flaws. They have issues. Peter Parker always have that thing where it's like, I could have saved my Uncle Ben, but I didn't because I was a jerk. You know, Thor always loved Jane Foster, but never decided to become human enough for her. Captain America was asleep in the ice for 70 years, and he left so many people. He left behind the one girl that he loves, except at Endgame when he went back in time and he married her, which is cool. But I don't know if any of you know that for a long time in the comic books, Iron Man was an alcoholic. And it was at a point where Iron Man was such an alcoholic and it was so bad he lost control of Stark Enterprises. He lost everything. He was homeless. You know, his alcoholism, he dealt with it, but he lost everything because of it. You know, another character in DC Comics, Green Arrow. He was one of the few human ones over in DC Comics, where Green Arrow had a cousin named Speedy, who was his sidekick, who was a heroin junkie. You know, Daredevil, when he was 9 years old, he pushed an old man out of the way of a runaway truck and then got hit with this toxic waste, quote unquote, and smacked him in the head and all the stuff went in his eyes. He is blind. He'll never get his sight back. It doesn't matter because he has that radar sense and he has those great reflexes and he was taught by the deadliest ninja on the planet, but he's still blind. And he discovers his mother was a nun. You know, and he discovers that his father was working for the Italian mobsters where he would throw fights. You know, that kind of messes with you after a while. And then his father's killed. He doesn't know who his mother is. He's 9 years old. He's blind, and he's in a Catholic church. You know, so that's enough already as it is. You know, I mean, the characters over at Marvel are far more human, or at least relatable. You know, Thor could be defeated. You know, Captain Marvel can be defeated. Wolverine can be defeated. You know, Spider-Man can be defeated. You know, and that's why I love Marvel a lot better than DC because, you know, Batman, for every single thing that he encounters, someone will ask Batman, well, how are you going to do it? How are you going to figure it out? And he's like, well, I'm Batman. I'll figure it out at some point. And he does. Like, come on, man. Enough. Yes?
Did you ever come over any comics that weren't released to the public? And can you share any of the stories that might have happened? So have you inked any that they never released the storyline for?
Yeah. I inked a piece for a comic that was published right after 9/11. And it never saw daylight because it was too suggestive. It was too gory. It was, it didn't get past the editor-in-chief's desk because not a lot of people knew that he had a cousin who died in the towers. And the art was a bunch of firemen carrying one of their brothers out of the rubble. And the editor took it way too personally, and he did not want it in the book. So yeah, that's the one. The only page that I ever did that was never published out of the 2,000 odd pages that I inked at Marvel, maybe the few hundred at DC, maybe a couple thousand that I've drawn, or out of any of the ones that I did for my graphic novel, that's the only one, just that one. But I understand why. You know, where I lived in Staten Island, the most southern part of New York City, 3 people on my block died. They all worked at Deloitte & Touche, the accounting firm, I think on 104 World Trade Center, the 104th floor of World Trade Center of the first tower. And they died instantly when the plane hit them. I was there, by the way. That was fun. But yeah, that was the only one. Any other questions, please? Yes?
Have you written any stories of your own?
Yeah, my graphic novel. As a matter of fact, where's my bag? Can you get it for me, please? Yes. If I may, 1 second. Put one of those please stand by signs up there or something. I'm going to pass this around. Before I was talking about my graphic novel. What I have here are copies of chapter 1 and 2 that if anybody wants to just look at them, just breeze through them. This is mine. Ta-da! It's about a young woman by the name of Cassandra, who's a ballet dancer in Milan, who discovers through a series of unfortunate events that not only does she hold great mystic powers, but she's a keeper of the wrath, who are a coven of sorcerers whose only purpose is the complete subjugation of all humankind. Now, how she figures out and discovers why she has these powers will lead her to believe whether she'll embrace her destiny or be consumed by it. And I wrote the first story. You're gonna love this one. I wrote this first story right after I landed. I arrived here February 29th of 2020. And when I got married and I moved here, and 2 weeks later quarantine hit, which was fun. A month and a half later, as I was telling my friend Nikki over here, I was diagnosed with cancer. That was fun. That was fun when that's like, okay, I'm gonna celebrate my new life with my new wife. Hey, you may die. You know, so that was always great. And I don't know if anybody notices this thing over here. Let's see if I can even see it in the camera. That nice little incision right over there. They put a 14-inch incision from the back of my ear all the way to my clavicle, pulled me open, and like did a Highlander thing where they cut my neck muscle in half in order to get to the lymph nodes that had the cancer. Now, I don't have cancer anymore, and that's great. But I wrote this story while I was like, you know, I mean, not during surgery because that would be difficult, but still, it's like I managed to write it and put this together and then release it in 2021. This is my magnum opus. It's the greatest thing that I've ever done in my life. And I'm going to come out with chapter 3 in June. So if anybody wants to take a look, if you want to pass it around, that's fine. I love it. And how I came about that was funny because I was doing commissions back in New York City. And the girl that you see there is actually a real-life human being. If you go to the last page of the first issue, you'll see that she is an actress from Italy. Her name is Sofia Broccani, and she is one of the most beautiful things that I've ever seen in my entire life. I adore this girl. And she asked me to do a commission for her one day, and she goes, okay. I go, okay, what would you like? She goes, I want to be a sorceress. I want to be a mystical sorceress. And I'm like, okay, fine, whatever. So I draw her in this like costume or uniform that's similar to the one in the front cover. But shortly afterwards was when I decided, you know, maybe I want to consider doing this, you know, publishing my own stuff. And a lot of my characters when I was younger really sucked. So I was like, wow, this is terrible. So then I came across her drawing, and all of a sudden the whole story popped in my head. I was like, well, now I got something. So I contacted her and I said, honey, I got to ask you something. This drawing, I want to make a comic book out of it. Can I use your likeness? Not only did she say yes, but she sent over about 100 pictures of her with all sorts of face poses and expressions and everything, just so I can know what she looks like. And it's her appearance that makes that book. And the one thing that I'm proud of that book is that she looks like an actual human being instead of some cybernetic, you know, plastic surgery nightmare from Los Angeles or something.
In terms of like converting the likeness of a real person into a comic, what would your process be? Like, how would you go about from the start?
I would just draw the person in regular proportions. I wouldn't exaggerate anything for the sake of it. You know, as I was saying before, I wouldn't make a woman's breasts bigger or her butt bigger or anything like that.
Would you kind of like sketch an outline to start with, or would you
Yeah.
like trace it or anything just to kind of?
I would sketch an outline of it. I'd examine the figure, and if I thought it was a little bit exaggerated, I would lessen it a little bit, and I'd tinker with it a little bit more. And if I liked it, I would keep it the way it is. But a lot of times, I never really had an issue with it. You know, so, all right, any other questions? Yes?
So I've got one from online, and it says, I know earlier you mentioned about not asking you your favorite characters, but they want to know, do you why is it your favorite?
Oh, I wish I had it here with me. It's a double-page spread. I'll bring it tomorrow. I have to find it. It's a double-page spread that that one was fun. It was for this title. It was for this book. It was for Mice and Man. That's the title of the book, Mice and Man. It was for this one. If I may put it here for a minute, please. Yep. Let's yeah, there. All right, here we go. You know, it was from a book titled Of Mice and Man, and it was a double-page spread that was obviously a lot bigger than this. And what happened was that I drew the double-page spread, and I didn't like the first one. I was like, wow, this really sucks. So I go to my editor, who the first guy I was working with, and I go, listen, I really need to redraw this. And it's like, it was halfway done. I already spent like a day and a half on it. He's like, look, I need this done by tomorrow. You're out of your mind if you're going to start again. And I go, well, I'm going to. And he's like, all right, we'll see what happens. So I get up at 6 in the morning because I work on the layout for the whole thing. I get up at 6 in the morning and I work on it until 4 o'clock in the afternoon. But then I realized, like, hey, wait a minute, you live in California, so I have another 3 hours. So I kept on working on it until about 7 o'clock. So I was on that double-page spread for about 13 hours. And it became the greatest thing that I've ever drawn in my entire life. To this day, and this is like 8 years ago. I'll bring in the page tomorrow, so if anybody wants to see the show online, tomorrow you'll see the detail in it. It had 22 panels in it, all the action I could possibly muster in there, and it was just completely insane how much work I put into it. And he looks at me and he's like, you're out of your mind. You're a genius, but you're out of your mind. And I'm like, I'm not a genius, I'm an idiot, because I should have thought of this before. But that was the best page that I ever drew. Any other questions? Yes, in the back.
Have you ever lost motivation if you have?
No, not once. Never. Never, ever, ever. And I will never lose motivation for it, even in my worst times. Because, like I said before, I live and breathe this. I'm going to tell you guys a little bit of a secret about me. I have attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. I have ADHD, all right? And for a long time, I lived with it. Now, whatever talent I had shined despite that, but I never really went past the inking stage, to be honest with you, because I quite frankly couldn't pay attention to the artwork that I was trying to do, and inking was just easy enough, so I fell into that hole. It was only until I reached my 40th birthday where I decided that I wanted to seek treatment to see what would happen. And I did. And when I saw treatment and when I got medication, now again, it doesn't work for everybody. I'm not saying take drugs, because, the drugs I take for the ADHD, they hurt my heart because they increase my blood pressure and my pulse rate by a good 25%. It's not fun. A lot of times, there are times when I feel my heart palpitating, but it's worth it because now I'm able to pay attention to everything that I do. And the pages that I showed you is just really a drop in the bucket compared to the stuff that I've done. Like far better than this, far better than the pages that I have here. And because I'm able to pay attention to what I'm doing is the reason why I'm doing so well now for myself. And the one thing that I did discover as a result of having ADHD and then all of a sudden becoming medicated for it is that when you don't know what it's like to have the ability to focus and pay attention to something that you love so much, and then you get it, you don't want to let go of it. To some of you to anybody here who doesn't have it or anything, it's nothing, which is great. I'm glad. But to anybody here who may or may not have ADHD, and you know the difference between being medicated and not medicated and being able to tell the difference and being able to pay attention to what you love, it opened up every single door for me. And I also realized that because I didn't seek out the medication before, I lost a lot of time in my life. Like if I had this medication 10 years from before, like if I had that medication when I was 30 instead of 40, I can only imagine what I would have accomplished. I mean, I'm not saying I don't have limited time left, but time is precious, you know. I mean, I'm not a spring chicken anymore, and because I'm able to pay attention to everything that I do, I love it more than anything because it's eluded me for so long. It's like an old girlfriend for me that it's like I finally came back into my life and we're in love again. I'll never let that go. I will never, ever lose motivation to create, to draw anything. Every single day for the past 10 years, I have drawn something. Whether it's a page or it's a doodle, or it's 5 pages, or I've painted something, or I drew something digitally, or I did something in Photoshop. I created every single day. And quite frankly, as an artist, you should not lose motivation. You should not. Because it's who you are. It's what you do. It's what you are. It's what you want to be. If you decide to stop and leave it alone for a bit and do other something, you don't really love it as much as you think you do. I don't mean to be pessimistic about that, but it's kind of true. Especially in my case, you know, for the longest time I couldn't pay attention to what the hell I was doing, and now that I do, I will never let that go. Don't ever let it go. If you have something to draw, if you have something to create, if you have a story to tell, do not let that story go by wayside. You know, it's like, I mean, I'll tell you later what I think about it, but all right. Is there any other questions? Anybody else? I mean, I
was actually thinking that maybe we could call it there.
Okay.
Questions and give you guys a chance to show some of your work off.
I want to see your art because it's probably good.
Just remember also, so just a quick thing, everybody here today is invited back tomorrow if you'd like to come. And also, if you think of any questions, it will be streamed online, so if you want to ask questions tomorrow, you think of one and think, oh, I wish I'd have asked that, you can ask tomorrow online as well. Okay, if you don't come back to this tomorrow night. Thank you, Rich, for the insights to the comic book artistry. Can we get a round of applause for everyone?
Thank you all for being here.